You are listening to the Fantasy IPA Podcast.
Can't wait. It's time to go eat, baby.
Your audio hangout for the latest intel, projections, and analytics.
Hey, we are playing to win. I'm in a league of my own. They ain't ready for me.
Visit us at fantasyipa.com and follow us on Twitter at fantasy_IPA.
Let's do this.
And welcome to another edition of the Fantasy IPA Podcast. I'm Jamie Black. I will be your host for this one. Joined with me is one of my partners in crime, John Bray. John, you want to say hi and tell everyone where they can follow you?
Yeah, hey, what's up, everybody? It's been a while since I've been on here, so excited to be back. But I am at FIPA_Bray, that's BRAY, on Twitter. My followers have slowed down, so I would love to start picking that back up, and looking forward to a good show ahead.
And you can, don't forget to visit on the website at www.fantasyipa.com. You can follow me at FIPA_BLACK, like the color. Okay, so it's redraft season, and in today's show, we're going to talk about some players who we think offer value right now regarding their current ADP. There's actually quite a few, so we'll try and get into that and cover as many of those guys as we can, and hopefully help you out if you have an upcoming draft this weekend or in the next couple of weeks or whatever. Just a little bit of news and notes we'll get to first real quick. Coming out of Detroit this last week, MLive.com reports that Golden Tate has battled a case of the dropsies at training camp. He had one last Saturday and a pair of them and on 11 drills during a joint practice with the Steelers last week. I know drops happen all the time. It's nothing to get too worked up about, but what this has led to is rumors that Marvin Jones might be emerging as the number one guy in Detroit. John, you buying into that?
You know, it's funny. There's been like conflicting reports about Golden Tate's struggle with the drops. Who knows what to believe? Because one, I think a reporter came out and said that he was struggling with drops, and then he corrected the way he stated it. So we're not really completely sure. I mean, knowing Golden Tate's history, he's not, a dynamic player in the sense of, beat guys over the top or outleap, the tall corners in the NFL. But one thing he's been known for is sure hands and crisp routes. And so it's hard to believe that he's really struggling too much with the drops. It could just be a case of Detroit game planning, trying to think, look, we've got two historic number two guys. We don't have a number one guy. And now we've added Anquan Bolden, who's, a little bit older in age. So, theoretically another number two, number three type. So maybe they're just kind of trying to shift the dialogue a little bit to, you don't know who to cover as their number one because they're going to spread it out amongst the number twos that they have there. So I don't buy into it too much. Golden Tate's not really a veteran per se, but this isn't something he's struggled with historically. So I kind of tend to discount it until we get into the regular season and we see it happening in the first week or two.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with you on that. I remember in 2014 when Calvin Johnson missed those 4 games, Golden Tate absolutely tore it up. In fact, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe over those 4 weeks he was the number 4 receiver in most fantasy formats. I don't think he's ever had any issues with drops. He's always been a crisp route runner. Marvin Jones has some size on him. I think probably the biggest takeaway from this is that in fantasy drafts, Golden Tate is being drafted in around the 4th round or so, which is still actually value. But Marvin Jones is being drafted later, like around 7 or 8, I believe. So maybe from a value standpoint, I could see Marvin Jones in a fantasy draft offering more value if you can get him, in the 8th round or something. But as far as on the football field, I think Golden Tate's the number 1 receiver in Detroit right now with Calvin Johnson retired. until he's not.
Yeah, and I'll make a point. Jim Bob Cooter, we had to say his name on this episode. Greatest name in sports history, perhaps. He is a dink and dunk, quick pass type guy. That is his philosophy, and he surrounded himself with players that kind of fill that mold. The only guy that really has the ability to truly stretch the defense is Marvin Jones. So I think you're going to see a lot of go routes out of Marvin Jones in 2016. I think you're going to see a lot of underneath work between Bolden and Tate and Eric Ebron. Ebron will certainly split the seam some of the time, but I think you're just going to see a high number of targets on Golden Tate, and then some of the big plays popping to Ebron and Marvin Jones, and then Bolden will kind of play the 2A to, or the part B to Golden Tate's A in the offense on the underneath and kind of slot type routes.
Yeah, I think so as well. And part of that news when they came out, part of the awe that everyone was admiring Marvin Jones was the fact that he was the deep threat. He was running the deep route. So, that doesn't necessarily always translate into big numbers. It's just it opens stuff up for the underneath guys. Golden Tate caught 90 passes last year with Calvin Johnson, so he's a good candidate to catch 100 passes this year. I don't think Marvin Jones catches that many passes. He's got a big body and speed, so I do see Marvin Jones hitting a home run or two every now and then. So, but yeah, at the end of the day, I think Golden Tate's the receiver you want in Detroit, and that's including their tight end Eric Ebron, who might have a breakout season. We'll see. We'll see how it works there. And then getting into other news, I guess, in Pittsburgh. Something's going on with Ladarius Green. Not too sure. ESPN Steelers reporter Jeremy Fowler believes that Ladarius Green could be headed to the IR. There's been rumors that he might have to retire due to concussions. He's been having headaches, or the rumors are that he's been missing practice because of headaches. The Steelers are, of course, denying this. They're saying it's due to the ankle that he had surgery on in January. But the overall takeaway is that Green, he remains highly volatile right now and questionable for week 1. John, what do you think? You think this is a structural, it's his ankle, or are they trying to cover something up?
I think the ankle's actually an afterthought. In this day and age, I mean, we're encountering something we've never encountered before, which is struggles with concussions. You've got every extreme from guys playing long after they should, like Junior Seau. Obviously that's a devastating story. And now, more recently, Wes Welker keeps trying to hang on and play with teams, and I don't think teams want to touch Wes Welker simply because of the concussions, and he just can't suffer a 7th or 8th concussion, according to the team's philosophy. And then on the other extreme, you have guys like Chris Borland. I mean, he was a fabulous rookie, didn't play very long at all in the NFL, and he finally decided to hang it up because he just didn't want to go that route. He had a couple of concussions and was done. So you just don't know, kind of where the players stand on whether they're going to, be the old school NFL, like shake it off and keep putting on the cleats, or if they're going to, say, look, my family, my life ahead are way too important to risk here with the concussion situation that we've seen more recently in the NFL. So I'm gonna retire really early and pursue another career path. So I think it's fully a concussion related thing. I think Ladarius Green is probably really struggling with where he wants to go with his life right now, and I can't imagine having to make that decision. That's something I haven't had to struggle with in my life. And so, whatever he does decide, I think he should have support from both the Steelers organization, the NFL in the large, and hopefully the fantasy community as well. But you just don't know right now. It's a complete wild card from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of risk associated with him right now. And I definitely feel like they're covering something up, and it's going to be the concussions is what they're covering up. So that ankle related issue, he should have been over that, and he should be running 100% by now. And it seems like they can't get comments out of his teammate. Ben Roethlisberger just shrugged his shoulders when they asked him about it. So Jesse James has been running with the first team offense all year, so who knows? Maybe he develops into a tight end option in Pittsburgh. But yeah, my thoughts go out to Ladarius Green. Hopefully it really is just an ankle thing and he's trying to get through it, but I'm with you. I think there's something more going on there, and it's scary, seeing what happened to all these guys. Concussions are bad news, so hopefully that's not what it is. Gut feelings telling me it is. Well, that's really it for news and notes. I think that's all we're going to cover today. We will get on to players, and right now we're going to cover redraft leagues, current ADPs on players. We're going to talk about guys that we see value in based on their current ADP. We're using Fantasy Football Calculator, FPC, the Fantasy Player Championships ADP, and also MFL's ADP to get three different areas to get kind of a pretty good range here. And let's start with quarterbacks. John, any quarterback comes to mind quickly regarding value based on their current ADP?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of them, and to be perfectly frank, at the quarterback position, they're all old. I think people love young up and coming quarterbacks. Guys like Andrew Luck, who obviously has shown immense potential, and the ceilings. The sky's the limit with this guy. So I get that, I understand that, and I respect that. I don't typically end up with Andrew Luck on my team because I just think the risk isn't worth the reward. I tend on quarterback in particular to go with the proven commodity. So, one guy I'm going to go ahead and dip into the later rounds that I'm really high on for this year, just based on the trajectory, despite his age and boring, perhaps not sexy appeal in the redraft community or the dynasty community, is Eli Manning. He has one of the top 2 or 3 receivers at his disposal in Beckham Jr. He's got one of the most impressive rookies to date in camp in Sterling Shepard, potentially starting opposite him. Whether Victor Cruz comes back or not, I don't think really moves the needle too much on Eli Manning, but he's got, 2 tight ends who have kind of taken turns in the last couple seasons showing potential in Larry Donnell and Will Tye. And he's got a receiving back in Shane Vereen, not to mention a starting running back in Rashad Jennings who can catch the ball as well. So, I mean, he's got weapons ad nauseum at his disposal. And on top of that, he's in the second year of Ben McAdoo's offense. I think you and I feel the same, Jamie, on Ben McAdoo. He's, one of those kind of under the radar historical offensive coordinators who really gets a lot out of the passing game. And now he's the head man taking over for Tom Coughlin in New York. And there is no reason to think that he won't still control the offensive strings. And Eli Manning seems head over heels with the system. Very happy, very content, and seemed more and more comfortable as the season went on in 2015. So I expect huge things out of him this year, and where he's being drafted in the 95 to 115 range in most formats is extremely low when you're looking at some of the quarterbacks going above him with lesser potential.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And Eli Manning, last year from week 4 on, he actually led the NFL in touchdown passes. He threw 31 touchdowns from week 4 through 17, which is one more than any other quarterback in the NFL. And that says a lot too. He's definitely, as you mentioned, he's coming alive in McAdoo's offense, and I think he's playing the best football of his career right now, and I don't think that's going to change. Okay, so while we're on quarterbacks, I've got one that I like. His ADP is not quite as low with Manning, but Carson Palmer, and another guy that I guess a lot of people, he got injured a couple of years ago, and it might have soured a few people, but But Arizona right now, they're running one of the best offenses in the NFL, and in fact, last year they led the NFL. They scored a touchdown on 30% of their offensive drives, and Palmer finished fifth at quarterback in 2015. He completed 64% of his passes. He had an 8.7 yards per attempt, and whenever you're looking at numbers that, most people look at stats, but if you want to look at a number that really measures a quarterback, yards per attempt is a great one, and that 8.7 yards per attempt is phenomenal. Over his last 30 games in Arizona under Bruce Arians, which is basically the second half of his first season in Arizona, he's averaged 290 passing yards a game and a little over 2 touchdowns per game. Fitzgerald still has gas in the tank. Michael Floyd, last year down the stretch, he really started coming into his own. John Brown is a young up-and-coming player. And then you throw in David Johnson, who is just as dynamic a player as there is in the NFL right now, and his receiving ability. And, Palmer's going to put up numbers, and he's going to continue to put up numbers this year, probably next year also. And we're talking about a guy that averaged within 2 points per game of those elite quarterbacks, Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees and Russell Wilson, everyone except for Cam Newton last year, because he just kind of blew everyone out of the water. But Carson Palmer's being drafted in that 80 to 87 range. So, we're talking about a guy that you can have in the 7th or 8th round when you have guys like Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson going, in the 35 range. And this guy's going to put up as many points as those guys. He might put up a point less per game. So Carson Palmer is one of those guys for me. I don't know, John, do you agree?
Yeah, no, I absolutely do. I mean, you're seeing Palmer similar to Eli Manning going later oftentimes than someone like Derek Carr, who, look, I like Derek Carr. I think he has a ton of potential. So, if you're kind of rolling the dice and, need a quarterback that could potentially blow it off the top because he's, got an Amari Cooper and, his trajectory you think is going to be sky high, then go for Derek Carr. But come on. I mean, in most cases, in 9 out of 10 cases, you do not take a Derek Carr in a redraft league over Carson Palmer or Eli Manning. Carson Palmer's weapons are just ridiculous between the proven, veteran in Larry Fitzgerald, Michael Floyd, who came back around at the end of last year, has one of the best skill sets amongst all wide receivers in the league, and then John Brown, the speedster, the small guy, who continually makes big plays game after game. And then David Johnson, who potentially is going to be the number 1 running back in fantasy this year as well. And perhaps the best head coach in the league, the guy that's smartest in the room, as they say. How Carson Palmer and Eli Manning are going behind Derek Carr or, Tom Brady. I love Tom Brady, but he's suspended for 4 games. Like, you should not be taking Tom Brady over Carson Palmer and Eli Manning. And, other guys, Ben Roethlisberger's had so much turmoil amongst his weapons that, I kind of tend to fade him a little bit more than others might. I think Palmer and Eli Manning should be right there in the conversation for 5th, 6th, 7th quarterback off the board, and they're just not being taken there right now. So they're not sexy, but they will win you money, fantasy football championships, whatever it is you're after.
Yeah, agreed. 100% agreed. Okay, so let's knock out one more quarterback, John. You have somebody in mind?
Yeah, let's shy away from the older guys and go with someone who had been drafted very, very late, but has come on lately. I think he's moved into maybe the top 15 quarterbacks being drafted, just as, no dramas happened, let's say, around him, and he's building off a great 2015 season that no one saw coming. But Kirk Cousins for the Redskins, he's got Deshaun Jackson back. He's got Pierre Garçon, who, those receivers are a little bit the equivalent of Eli Manning and and Carson Palmer. They're not sexy, but they're proven commodities. Deshaun Jackson will, score a long touchdown every other week, and Pierre Garçon will get 10 targets and catch 6 of those on any given week. And then he's added, at the receiver position, he's added Josh Doxson, who I think was the best talent as a receiver coming out of the draft. Didn't necessarily land in the best position, but he adds an element to them that can catch, go up and catch that red zone target that they didn't really have outside of Jordan Reed last year. So putting him on the outside, keeping Jordan Reed on the inside, if Reed can stay healthy, he's a top 3 tight end from fantasy perspective. And then Matt Jones, if he shows a year of development and, Chris Thompson stays healthy as a receiving back, that offense is another one that's just, primed to thrive this year under Jay Gruden. And he's just not being drafted very high. He's going behind, Marcus Mariota, who, look, again, another guy I love, but come on. I mean, Marcus Mariota, like, you're talking about a sophomore quarterback in a run-first offense versus Kirk Cousins, who's maybe not exciting, maybe wasn't the blue blood that Marcus Mariota was in terms of draft position and expectation, but he's in a passing offense with tons of weapons at his disposal. Mariota, they just shift off what was supposed to be their number one receiver. How are you going to take Marcus Mariota over Kirk Cousins? I don't get it unless, rushing yards are greatly rewarded over passing yards and so forth. So I would say he'd be my if I had to choose a younger guy that's a value play. I like what you put in your write-up about him, and I'm going to go along with that guy.
Yeah, I agree. I love Cousins. I like what he did last year. I think there's when he first was getting starts in Washington or getting playing time, there was a lot of pressure with RG3 sitting in the wings, and then also Gruden was quick to put in Colt McCoy, not last year or the year before. So I think Cousins maybe felt some pressure. He felt like someone was just staring over their shoulder. But once he relaxed last year over those last 10 games, he absolutely tore it up. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe over the last 10 games of the season, he finished as the number 4 quarterback in most standard formats. So this is a guy he can definitely break top 10. He did last year, and we really don't know how high the ceiling goes yet. So it'll be interesting to see. Stud tight end, great rookie receiver. I'm really excited to see what Kirk Cousins does in 2016 and the subsequent years. Okay, so moving on to running back. I guess I'm going to start with one, and it's not a super value, but based on where he's being drafted, he's getting overlooked a little bit, and it's LaShawn McCoy. McCoy was riddled with injuries last year to start the season. It showed. He didn't play very well at the beginning of the year. They rested him in weeks 4 and 5, and he returned in week 6. And over the next 9 weeks, he totaled 100 yards in every game except for one. And they played a lot of tough defenses too in those games. During that span, he was the number 4 running back. He did get dinged up again in week 15 or 16, I believe, and they kind of shut him down because they had nothing to play for. But I think what hurt him was he only rushed for 3 touchdowns, and I don't know that that's going to be so much of a problem this year. Carlos Williams reported to camp 20 pounds overweight. He's starting the year on a 4-game suspension. By all accounts, McCoy has lost weight. He's in the best shape he's been in since Chip Kelly took over in Philadelphia. And I have a feeling he's going to punch the ball into the end zone more frequently this season. And Buffalo, they did a very good job running the ball last year. And with the mess going on behind McCoy right now, if he stays healthy, he could have a huge year. And he's being drafted, in the 4th round. And this is a guy that should be drafted as a top 10 running back in redraft leagues, but because of the injuries and the new the new shiny toys, he's not quite getting the love he deserves, I think. I don't know. What do you feel about LaShawn?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat there too. Hopefully, we'll have someone to dissent on at some point in this podcast. But LaShawn McCoy, that touchdown thing's a fluke. Like, there's no way around it. He's always been a touchdown scorer. He's in a run-heavy offense with Buffalo where they want to give the running back the ball. It didn't happen. And he was hurt some of the time, but even when he did play, he probably should have doubled that touchdown total at least. So the touchdowns will be there this year. Like his competition is nil. He's got a couple of one suspended incumbent back up. He's got a rookie who everyone was raving about that could face suspension this year. May not, but still he's a rookie and raw and already getting in the doghouse. And Mike Gisley, who's a average talent at best. So he's not facing much on the competition chart. He's fully healthy. All reports are that he's got his, Philadelphia swagger, wiggle back, and he looks really sharp, really prompt in his movements. And I think he's up for a huge year if he can stay healthy, which is always an if with any player. So I'm a big LaShawn McCoy fan this year. You mentioned that he's going in the fourth round some of the time. If he ever lasted to the fourth round in my draft, that wouldn't happen. I'm scooping him up third round at the very latest. I've actually drafted him into the second round a couple times as my number one running back, and very happy with that.
Okay, so yeah, both agreeing on McCoy. So who's the first name you're thinking of running back?
Yeah, I'm probably going to continue to turn listeners off with my non-sexy plays, but I'm going to go with Frank Gore right here. He's being drafted as if he's one of the lower end starting running backs in the NFL, which, in terms of his age and, diminished skill set, maybe he is, but just look at the situation. I mean, he's in Indianapolis's offense where I feel like a lot of people are thinking, they're going to throw 50 touchdowns and run for 6, maybe. I don't know, but so many times receivers are caught inside the 5-yard line. Frank Gore is going to benefit. I mean, who else do they have? We're talking about, everyone's building up an undrafted free agent running back, which fine. It probably is the second best option in Indianapolis, and so be it. But, 32 teams passed on him in the draft for 7 rounds. So he's clearly not, some transcendent talent that's going to overtake a Frank Gore who knows how to pass block, knows the routes to run, knows what hole to hit. He may be a couple steps slower than he used to be, but we're talking about a potential Hall of Famer here that has lost a couple of steps and still has enough drive left that the franchise decided not to draft a backup for this guy. So I'm very high on Frank Gore this year. I think that he's a guy that you should be drafting well in advance of about 10 to 15 guys that are going ahead of him. Just in terms of his opportunity. I mean, I think one guy I'd like to compare him to is Latavius Murray. Latavius Murray is an incredible talent, but doesn't have nearly the mindset, nearly the discipline, and nearly the experience that Frank Gore has. And let's be honest, Raiders offense up and coming, Indianapolis offense, if Luck is healthy, is already established. So I'm going to take the guy that's probably going to punch in 10 to 12 touchdowns, catch 40 passes, and run for 900 to 1,100 yards. He's going to rank in the top 15 just based on opportunity alone. And that is a huge value. I just cannot understand why he's going as running back 25 to 30 off the board.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And last year, I think he even finished in the top 15, if I remember right. And that was a terrible year all around for Indianapolis's offense. So yeah, Gore's definitely being overlooked. And again, that's just one of those bias things. People, they think Frank Gore, he's not a sexy name, he's getting old, and they grab someone who hasn't done anything yet. Okay, for me, next running back, I'm going with Rashard Jennings. Right now he is being drafted. His ADP is around 100. The range that we're using, it's 96 to 108. And this is a guy that, It's deserved because they didn't use him last year the way they should have. But when I look at Rashad Jennings, I see as a floor him being a high-end running back 3, strong flex play. Realistically, I think I see a strong running back 2 in him. And the reason is because the Giants have committed to getting him the ball this year. And it's over and over and over. They've said it, and I do believe them. And the reason I believe them is because last year they really struggled to get any kind of running game going in New York. And it wasn't until week 14 they committed to Jennings. And, that was the first time all season where he had more than 13 or 14 carries, I believe. And he finished the year, those last 4 weeks, with he averaged about 20 carries a game, about 22 touches per game over those 4 weeks. And over those 4 weeks, he finished as a number 5 running back in most fantasy formats. So the Giants, again, they said that they will get Jennings the ball this year, that there is not going to be a rotation. Vereen's the third down back. He's going to see a lot of the third down stuff, but that's not going to take away from Jennings getting his rushing yards. He was only catching a couple of passes a game, but the guy can catch. He does have receiving skills. But the Giants are a solid offense. We were talking about it earlier. I do believe them when they say they're going to give Jennings the ball. Finishing as the number 5 running back over the last quarter of the year last year. I'm not saying he's going to be a top 5 running back this year. I just think he's definitely going to be at least a strong running back 2 this year. And the Giants have a good enough offense to where Jennings should be able to score, 8 plus rushing touchdowns. So, and he's falling off the draft boards right now in around the 9th round. This is a guy that, if I can draft Rashard Jennings as my second running back in the 9th round, I'm thrilled.
I can't disagree with you more. I feel bad that we're choosing all the old guys here, and maybe it's because we're old, Jamie. I don't know. Are we sympathetic to him? But, Rashad Jennings, all the reports are good. So another story where he's just getting glowing reviews for his work ethic and understanding of the game, and I don't see anyone taking that starting spot from him. He's the one most equipped to do it, and again, as long as he stays healthy, he's in an incredible offense with a ton of opportunity. I reciprocate everything you said.
Okay, so next running back.
I'm going to go a little bit different route. This is someone that you don't hear much about at all, I don't think, and not along the lines of our veteran group. But I look at the numbers alone and ignore the name, what people perceive to be, his role, his skill set, and I even then, he is great from a fantasy perspective if you're in a PPR league. Let's go with Theo Riddick. Theo Riddick outscored on a PPR basis Amir Abdullah by 60 plus points last season, and we're hearing that he's going to play a lot of wide receiver this year. So you're talking about a running back that was seconded behind only Danny Woodhead last year in terms of the receiving role as a PPR back, and now he's moving into a part-time receiver role. I think that they have carved out a position for him and Jim Bob Cooter. That's the second time I've said it. Jim Bob Cooter's offense, the dink and dunk, where he is going to get so many catches, it could set an NFL record, in my mind, for running back receptions. I really think he has that chance here. And you've got Joey Bell. I know he wasn't much of a factor last year, but he's basically removed from the equation. I don't think Stephen Ridley's going to even fulfill those shoes. You're talking about a 2 running back system. I think Zach Zenner is solid, but I think he only really comes into play if Abdullah gets hurt. So you've got Theo Riddick and Amir Abdullah. Amir Abdullah is not a sturdy back. I think he's, kind of wants to be, and I think he's an incredible talent, but I think he's proven that, it's going to be hard for him to withstand a full NFL season. So I really think Detroit looks at these 2 running backs as 1A, 1B, and then on top of that, Riddick gets the wide receiver role when he's not in the running back role. So he is a guy that I think if you're in a PPR league, you can get him so late and way beyond, like, let's say a Duke Johnson, who, granted, could have a blow-up year. But Theo Riddick has already kind of had that blow-up year in terms of receptions that everyone's predicting for Duke Johnson. And yet he's going, 15 spots behind Johnson in terms of the running back selection list? So it's not a popular pick. It's not someone that many people are highlighting right now. But I think, just from a fantasy perspective, not from an NFL talent perspective, Theo Riddick could be this year's Danny Woodhead.
Yeah, and a lot of people probably don't realize he had 700 receiving yards last year. So, yeah, I agree. And I didn't even realize it until you mentioned it, and I looked down at the numbers here. But, 80 catches for 697 yards.
As a running back.
That is unreal. Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm going to throw one more name out here. This is a wild card. Right now, I have no idea what's going on in Baltimore. But there is a buzz around Terrence West. Terrence West came into the league with a lot of buzz, and I mean, he just physically, he's an athlete, and he never quite made it work. But reportedly, this offseason, he committed to getting in shape and playing football. He lost 15 pounds. Supposedly looks great, has a new attitude. Still, he's only 25 years old. They said that every practice he's turning heads in Baltimore. I know it's the preseason. He did score 2 rushing touchdowns in their first preseason game. And I've always said it. I don't like to pay attention to preseason games, especially the first 2. Or, if you want to watch a preseason game, watch the third one. But he's a guy, not someone that I would target per se, but if you get late in your draft, whenever you're taking your shots on flyers, guys like that, this is a guy that he's intriguing to me right now. So, he doesn't really have an ADP. That could change very soon. It could change before, by the time people listen to this, it could change for their drafts. But Terrence West, just a wild card. Someone I wanted to throw out there. He could just be a tease, but definitely someone I think worth taking a flyer on. If he has that kind of potential. So, but it is kind of muddied in that back.
Yeah, I think I like where you can get Terrence West a lot better than where I like Javorius Allen or Kenneth Dixon right now. Justin Forsett, the coaching staff is basically telling us to ignore all the headlines, which I think they're talking about Dixon as a rookie and potentially West as a free agent signing, but and to focus on Justin Forsett because he looks as good as he did 2 years ago and understands the Trestman system fully. That being said, West is a lot cheaper than Forsett, and West has looked really good in practice, really good in the first preseason game. So I think you have to start paying attention at the very least. And I wouldn't touch Allen or Dixon right now. Forsett, I'm kind of high on still, but I would take West probably number 2 where you can get him.
Yeah. Okay. So before I move on to receiver, any other names burning a hole in your
I love the receiver position. Let's move there.
Okay. Receiver position. Okay, let's start with you, John. What's first name you can throw out?
Oh, let's see. I'm gonna have to be Homer here and go with Michael Crabtree. He's a Red Raider. I'm a Red Raider. He's had an interesting career, to say the least. Came out of college, was drafted high, only behind Darius Hayward-Bay, and I think it's safe to say he's probably going to supersede that career. So, best receiver from his draft class, more than likely. But he he kind of was a prima donna, a little bit injured rookie year, kind of slow to get going in his career. But once he did, the more the light shined, the more he turned it on, and up to the point of him and Richard Sherman having the classic exchange in the in the was that the championship or the Super Bowl? I can't remember. I think that was the championship, right? Yeah, the NFC championship. So, he after that kind of fell off a little bit. The whole San Francisco franchise fell off it, let's be honest. And then, it looked like we didn't really know what was going to come of him. So he took a 1-year deal with Oakland, and it was a prove it deal, and he proved it. He was paired with Amari Cooper, one of the most promising rookies we've seen in the last 20 years. And the two of them just, elevated that offense. I'm not going to give any credit to Latavius Murray. I'll give some credit to Derek Carr, but I really think it was Cooper and Crabtree just being wide receiver options that they just hadn't seen in Oakland since before Al Davis took over. I mean, Tim Brown is the last guy I can think of that really warranted, much receiver respect. They just took speed guys that weren't really that talented. Well, Crabtree isn't a speed guy, but he is incredibly talented. And I think he still has several years left in his legs. And if you've got Amari Cooper drawing the number one quarterback, presumably on the other side, Crabtree's going to eat the lunch if your name's not Richard Sherman. So he's ready, he's primed, and again, not necessarily the most exciting option because he's had these lulls in his career, and he's not necessarily the big play guy, but he is a very reliable, throw him 8 passes, he's going to catch 7 type receiver. That'll rack up the fantasy points for you as a very solid wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 option for you.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And he's currently going in, around 80th off the board, which is insane considering he finished last year as a wide receiver 2. And I don't see how he doesn't improve this year. That Oakland offense, the offensive line, they possibly have the second or third best offensive line in the NFL now. And Derek Carr is, quarterbacks, it takes a couple of years. Derek Carr's going into his 3rd year now. And, Amari Cooper, yeah, he's the shiny toy in Oakland. But Crabtree's that guy that is going to have a solid floor. And, it's just, you know what you're going to get from him. You're going to get 85 receptions, probably, maybe more. You're going to get 1,000 yards or so, and you're going to get 8 touchdowns. And he's probably not going to do anything less than that. He might not do a whole lot more than that, but that makes him a strong wide receiver too. And, all it would take is, maybe 5-10 more catches, 100 more yards, and double-digit touchdowns.
Right,
he's a wide
and
receiver
that's very possible with this guy.
Yeah, he's definitely resurrected his career there in Oakland. He's one of my favorite receivers. I've drafted him in a lot of the MFL 10s I've participated in this year. So I'm gonna start at wide receiver. I'm gonna start on the high end, and I'm gonna start with T.Y. Hilton. His current ADP, it's not super spectacular. He's getting drafted around 27 to 30, which is, third round, early to mid third round, I guess. And he finished as the number 12 overall receiver in 2014, despite missing 2 games. So his points per game would have had him finishing 6th. And I think that basically he did exactly what Emmanuel Sanders did per game on a per game basis in 2014, and I believe Emmanuel Sanders finished 5th that year. But yeah, he was on pace for a stat line of 94 catches, 1,537 yards, and 8 touchdowns over 16 games when he missed those last 2. Last year, he did slow down a little bit, but I mentioned this earlier. Indianapolis's offense was just in shambles last year, and that offense goes as Andrew Luck goes. So Luck is healthy. He's not an injury prone guy. I don't think we're going to see Andrew Luck miss too many games in his career. Just a feeling I had. I know it's hard to say that for sure about somebody, but he's back. They're going to throw the ball. Hilton he's the number one receiver. Fleener's gone. Fleener, he contributed a lot last year. Moncrief, a lot of people are saying Moncrief is the 1A or 1B, and I can buy into that a little bit, but Hilton proved, he can catch the ball. Now, he's not just a deep threat. He caught the ball over the middle of the field. He made some big plays in 2014, and when I watched him play, I was impressed anyway. And he wasn't quite as efficient last year without Luck. He still had some good games, but anyway, he's being drafted right now as the number 15 or 16 receiver. And I think he's a guy who's a top 10 talent with Andrew Luck at the helm this year. Again, this isn't a super value. It's not a Michael Crabtree being drafted around 80, but this is a guy who you could target as a number one receiver, a low-end one receiver, if you miss out early. Like if you want to draft Le'Veon Bell or Todd Gurley in the first round, you miss out on one of those big stud number one type receivers, and who knows, maybe you get Hilton in the third round, and he's a potential number one receiver. I say worst case scenario is a very high end number two receiver, but he's the first guy I'm going to bring up. He still had over 1,100 receiving yards last year with nobody at quarterback. But anyway, that's my first guy, John. How do you feel?
Yeah, I'm maybe not as high on him, and it's not so much anti-Hilton. I do think he's a wide receiver too, hands down. I think it's hard to predict between Hilton, Moncrief, and now Philip Dorsett in his second year stepping in as a potential breakout player. It's hard for me to predict which of those guys is really going to see an uptick from where they're being drafted. I think Hilton is strong. I think he's a solid pick, and I don't think you're going to go wrong with him because I think his floor is incredibly high. He's going to have 1,000 yards. He's going to have 5+ touchdowns, and he's going to have 70+ receptions. So, wide receiver 2, hands down, no doubt about it. I'm a little leery on where Luck's going to go now because they've changed up things quite a bit in terms of, Moncrief is another year in the system. Dorsett's a sophomore. And, I think you pointed out in your article that we posted today that Dorsett, when he's had limited snaps, but when he has been on the field, he's produced at an incredibly high, prolific rate. So I just don't know. I just don't know where Luck's going to go, if he's going to spread it around or if he's going to start targeting one of the younger guys more, or, if Hilton's going to come back around to the 80 to 85 receptions and 1,300 yards and 7 touchdowns range. It's hard for me to guess right now. So I probably think he's being drafted about where you'd expect compared to what you're saying. But you'll probably prove me wrong.
Fair enough. But since you brought this up, and this is one of my favorite late round picks, I'm going to jump into Philip Dorsett. I don't know how Indianapolis is going to run more through wide receiver sets this year, and Dorsett will see the field. Last year what I liked about Dorsett is in his first game in 17 snaps, he was on the field. He caught a pair of catches for 45 yards. I believe he followed that up a week later in 14 snaps, 2 catches for 42 yards and a touchdown. So Philip Dorsett is a guy who I don't think he's going to blow up or break out because there are, because T.Y. Hilton and Moncrief are both number 1, number 2 type receivers there. I actually think Dwayne Allen, will probably have his best year as a pro as well. And as you mentioned, I think they have a running back that can score some rushing touchdowns. Dorsett's a home run hitter, though. And for a guy that's being drafted at 130 or 140, this is a guy, he's the ultimate bus ball receiver.
True.
I think I have him in almost every MFL 10 I'm in. I've drafted him. But yeah, with Luck at quarterback over those first 3 games last year, Dorsett had 5 catches for 113 yards and a touchdown, and what amounted to 40 snaps or something like that. So, just kind of a playoff Hilton there. Dorsett going late, other end of the spectrum. This is a guy that you can get after the 10th, 11th round, this is a guy who, this is a part of an article that I call shots. This is a guy that, once you have your starters in place, Dorsett's a guy to take a shot on for sure. At receiver. Okay, value at receiver. So
yeah, I'll go with one more at least. I started with Crabtree as a wide receiver 2 that's being drafted more like a wide receiver 3. I'm going to go with a guy that's being drafted like a wide receiver 2 that I think it remains a wide receiver 1. Jarvis Landry with Miami. He finished the season, I believe, last year in the 9th slot in the PPR format. And, I think what people are seeing is, surrounding of talent. Devontae Parker's coming on. They add Laurent Carew, maybe even Jakeem Grant in the draft. And then you've got Kenny Stills, second year in the system. But Rashard Matthews was really the other receiver there that drew many targets last year, and he's gone. So while there's a lot of potential amongst the other set of guys, I mean, the one constant is Jarvis Landry. This guy could not be more consistent. I mean, he's had 3 years in the league. His first year, once he got rolling, you project that out on a game-to-game basis from 2014 through the 2000, or I guess he's only played a year and a half, but through the 2015 season, he's had about 20 games now of very little standard deviation amongst his game. He catches almost every single week. He catches at least 4 more passes. He catches at least 50, 60 more yards and gets a touchdown, probably just under every other week. And so he's rock solid. He's not going to have many of those, dozen catch, 150 yard, 2 touchdown games. That's not his game. And if you're in a best ball format, maybe Jarvis Landry, depending on your roster composition, isn't the right pick for you. But in terms of getting a solid guy that you can lean on that doesn't miss games and just puts up points week after week after week because he's so sure-handed, so crisp on his routes, and will occasionally break a play here and there, I think Jarvis Landry is hands down a wide receiver 1 and being drafted like a top end wide receiver 2. So he's taken a little bit of fallback based on his production, and I don't really understand why.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And he's consistent week in and week out. And in PPR leagues, he's about as can't miss as they come. So, before we move on to tight ends, there's another receiver I just wanted to mention. We're talking about as can't miss as they come, and that's Eric Decker. This guy's probably. He's completely overlooked. He's not a sexy name anymore. That he's not in Denver. He doesn't have Peyton Manning throwing him the ball. Everyone and Brandon Marshall had a phenomenal year last year, but Eric Decker had a pretty darn good year as well. And in 15 games he finished as the number 14 receiver. If you average back in his points, he would have projected out to 11, I believe, in a PPR system. And Decker he's not a guy you want in a best ball league because he's not going to catch for 150 yards, 2 touchdowns. But I would say that Eric Decker probably has the best floor. And Jarvis Landry's right there too, among receivers in PPR leagues. I think he is the only receiver last year in PPR leagues. And I could be wrong. Maybe Jarvis Landry did as well, but he scored double-digit points in every single game. With that said, though, he never scored 30 points, but he was a guy that was scoring around 15 to 20, 21, 22 points a game. That is a very, very strong wide receiver too. That's even a low end wide receiver one. You want to see in PPR leagues, you do want to see your receiver ones break 25, 30 points every now and then. Decker's not the guy that's going to do that, but he is the ideal wide receiver two in PPR fantasy leagues.
It's a stat maybe most people don't really think about, but targets, the Denver duo of Sanders and Demaryius Thomas last year were the only pair that had more targets, and they barely edged the Marshall-Decker pair. I mean, there's no one else to throw the ball to in the Jets system. And so they continue to go back to the well time and time again with Marshall and Decker. I mean, past the Denver duo and the Jets duo, you're talking about the next highest is the Oakland pair that we just talked about, Crabtree and Cooper. And then after that, real trivia stumper, Golden Tate and Anquan Bolden for Detroit would be number 4 in terms of targets last year. So the Jets guys, they're going to get theirs. They're going to get their opportunities. Decker runs, phenomenal routes. He is a true professional through and through. He loves Ryan Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick loves him. And Marshall's part of that awkward threesome as well. Those guys all love each other. I'm not going to go any further than that. But they're happy that Fitzpatrick's back in the fold, and, they're going to keep moving forward the way that they did before. Amaro may come up at the tight end position. There's really not a third wide receiver to speak of. I mean, Devin Smith was drafted last year. He's just didn't pan out, and I don't think he will this year. He may get a deep ball here and there, but Chris Ivory leaves, so they bring in Forte. So maybe, but Bilal Powell was already the receiving back. So I don't know that they're going to throw that much more to the running backs. It's going to be Marshall and Decker again. And same common theme on this podcast. People just aren't drafting the sexy player. They never do. Year after year, you can win fantasy championships by going over substance, over actual, sex appeal.
Exactly. And last year, Marshall was a perfect example of that with the 6th round ADP, and everyone got excited. The guys that drafted Allen Robinson, yet many of those guys passed on Brandon Marshall. And Allen Robinson was great.
Yeah, ridiculous in hindsight that Marshall was going up.
You passed on Brandon Marshall, Yeah, and maybe it was a new system, I don't know. But Brandon Marshall, he's the all-time leader in 100 reception seasons in the NFL. This guy's going to put up numbers. And this goes without saying. We don't need to talk about Marshall. If you guys don't know that he's going to be, he's easily a strong wide receiver one. Could finish number 1. He's going to be a top 10 easy, maybe a top 5 again this year. But yeah, Marshall's a stud. He's just a stud. Okay, so on to tight ends. I guess let's knock a couple of these guys out before we wrap up tonight.
I'm going to go with the guy that finished number 1 at tight end last year in PPR formats, I believe, slightly edging out Rob Gronkowski. Maybe most people don't know, but Delanie Walker. He, I guess depending on your format, maybe it wasn't number 1. There were a lot of guys clustered there together, but in some formats he was, and he is back as the primary receiving option in the Tennessee offense, which I mentioned earlier isn't necessarily a passing-based offense, but what they are is a quick pass offense. And so someone like Delanie Walker lining up in the tight end position can quickly get across the seam, and with his speed, he has made a mockery of the other cornerbacks and linebackers trying to cover him in the AFC in the past season. So I like him to continue what he's doing and finish, at worst, probably number 4, number 5 tight end, barring injury. Certainly, I can't blame you for taking Gronkowski and maybe a Jordan Reed above him, but I'm probably leaning Delanie Walker above the Travis Kelce's and the Greg Olsons of the world, just because I think that he is a security blanket, much in the same way Greg Olson is for Newton, but I think Walker is a little bit younger and a little bit more dynamic, has the speed that most tight ends don't have. So I think with all the problematic wide receiver situation in Tennessee. Marcus Mariota is bound to continue to lean on him as he develops as a sophomore passer, and Delanie Walker is about as good of a value as you can find, being drafted in the 60 to 70 range at the tight end position.
Right now in PPR leagues, he's a top 3 tight end for sure, and being able to get him that late is definitely value. I don't have much more to add other than I agree with you 100% there. I'm going to go a little bit deeper, and I'm going to be a little bit of a homer here, and it's because I think Jason Witten he is not a sexy name, and he gets less love than more players than I can think of. This guy, this guy is phenomenal in PPR formats, especially. When you want to mention a name, a guy that's being drafted in the 13th or 14th round of PPR drafts at tight end, I don't even know how many tight ends are being drafted ahead of him. And we're talking about a guy that year in and year out, he's missed one game in his entire career. One game in 2003. That is also the only time that he has not finished as a tight end 1 in the top 12, 2003. It's the last time he had a year with less than 64 receptions or less than 700 yards, 2003. He doesn't always put up big touchdown numbers, but you can generally count on him for 5 or so, 6. With Romo back, I do think you can count on 5 or 6 touchdowns from him. I don't think he's going to catch 100 passes like he did a couple years ago. I don't see 1,000 yards, but again, we're talking value here. So this is a guy where you can draft. Right now, the low end of his ADP is 144, which is the last pick in the 12th round, and this is a guy that's probably going to finish somewhere around 8, 9, 10 at tight end and PPR systems. So when I think of value on a player, I'm looking at tight end, and I see a guy getting drafted, almost as an afterthought that finishes top 10, 13 years in a row, or as a number 1 tight end 13 years in a row. I just don't get it. And to me, he's going to do it until he doesn't. So keep drafting him until he doesn't.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more there. John? I know we're homers here, and look, I'm 40 years old. I could probably go out there and still play. He's only 34. Like, come on. It's not that old. Like, there's guys playing much later into their careers. But I think people just want to write him off because he had a slight downtick last year. I'm talking ever so slight downtick last year. But you have to consider Romo didn't play. Like, he played with the worst set of quarterbacks for the majority of the season in the entire NFL. And still, like you said, put up 70-plus catches, 700-plus yards. 3 touchdowns is about his bottom level. So you're talking about, what did he finish last year as a number 10 tight end? And, yeah, 10 tight end PPR league. So you're talking about a starting fantasy-worthy tight end being drafted as a mid-late tight end 2 in Jason Witten. He is the ultimate value that, if you want to wait on tight end, which I'm not necessarily suggesting you do, but if you do, Jason Witten can keep you competitive day in and day out. And if you want to pair him with, a high upside tight end that's, maybe hasn't proven himself, like a Clive Wofford or a Colby Fleener would be a great example. He's had some great years, but if you can go get Colby Fleener early and then Jason Witten late, you probably have the best tight end pair at the end of the year. I would strongly predict that. So anyhow, I'm big on Witten as well. I think that his floor puts him in the borderline end of the tight end 1, high end tight end 2 position.
Everything we've talked about on this podcast, the values, every position, we are dropping articles on the website. So don't forget to visit the website at www.fantasyipa.com. You can go to articles and read about the players that we think offer value at their current ADP. Hopefully we can help you out in your drafts. Any closing thoughts, John?
No, it's good to get back.
Goodbyes.
We're right in the meat of it all, and we've got a couple weeks now to really focus on the fantasy drafts. And so we're here for any questions you want to send us on Twitter. We're always happy to help out. We may not be, the name that you recognize, but we absolutely know our stuff, and we're always going to be more responsive than most of those that you reach out to. So please do. And we look forward to having Art back in the next podcast. We'll finally have the team of three back together for the first time in a few weeks. And onward and upward. We're getting really close, guys. We're less than a month away from the start of the season.
Yeah, definitely. Sure are. And you guys, please remember to follow John at FIPA_Bray, BRAY. Thanks for joining us again, guys. Thanks for listening. That's going to wrap it up for another edition of the Fantasy IPA Podcast. Please remember to visit the site at www.fantasyipa.com. You can follow the site at fantasy_IPA. Don't forget to follow me at FIPA_Black. And until next time, don't forget to get you some IP. Yeah. Adios.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy IPA Podcast. Visit us at fantasyipa.com and follow us on Twitter at fantasy_IPA.
Hail to the king, baby.
To the house, baby.
Please subscribe and review at iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast provider.
Call trust. That's called trust.
See you next time, and until then, make sure you get you some IPA.
Come get some.
Get some. Get some. Get some.
We just want to say thank you for all the love.
And we're out.